Hi, I'm Arthur. Welcome to another video. Today we're going to paint the City Hall of Utrecht. I was finally able to make a new video again after some difficulties, so thank you for your patience, and hello if you're watching this for the first time. Welcome to this channel. And boy, did my channel take off with the latest video, so thank you all for that. So let's get straight into the painting process without delay. So here is the reference photo that I have taken on a beautiful late summer September day. Now let's crop this photo a little bit. Okay, that's better. You can see I have also added some grid lines. So this will translate into a 40 by 50 centimeters painting. And I have chosen this subject because of its strong composition. Because in the top left of the photo you have this beautiful city hall building which is all in the light. And then on the right and bottom of the painting you have this sort of Art Deco building and the old medieval bridge and the canal. Which is all in darkness, and this creates a beautiful almost yin-yang like balance. And then in the middle you can see between the two buildings and you look into the distance at these old houses. Okay, so let's go to the painting process. Before we start, a quick look at my palette. For those interested, you can pause the video here and see the main colors that I use for this painting. Okay, so let's start with a big mop brush. And we start in the light side of the painting. So we're going to paint the shadows under the roof of the City Hall building. And we're going to use warmer colors first. At this point we are keeping things fairly light because the building, it looks kind of white, but it's not really white. It's sort of sand colored. So it also has a bit of a texture to it, sort of plaster texture. So I'm continuing the wash down and also using this rectangular brush, and that's very handy for painting details in buildings and sparing out the white of the windows, which reflect the light. And the same for the space between the large columns. Making it a bit darker on the top. And now defining the base color of the columns. And I'm working my way towards the right. Mostly working from top to bottom and from left to right. And the colors that I'm using for this first wash, it's basically what I have left on my palette. It's all sorts of yellow and earth tones mixed together and watered down a lot. You don't want the colors to be too intense, so I made them slightly muted. So below the columns I already played around with a bit darker shadow, which is more bluish, but I'm not going to go further with that. I'm going to continue with the lighter part here on the left. This part is slightly darker than the rest of the City Hall. Making it a bit darker on the top. Just dropping it in the active layer. Painting the shadow line. So I wanted to paint the lighter parts of the building before painting the sky. So now this is in place. I'm wetting the sky area, just sort of dragging with the side of my brush. And I'm laying my board flat for a moment, because I don't want the sky come falling down too much because of the gravity. So in the photo the sky is this boring blue, and I find that it often doesn't work that well for cityscapes. The buildings already draw a lot of attention, so I want the sky to be fairly minimal. So I started with warmer colors, and now I'm dropping in some warmer blue with a mixture of cobalt, a bit of cerulean, and just dropping it in. So my wooden board is back in place, and now I'm cleaning up a little bit the areas where I want to keep the highlights of the building. And now with that done, it's just a matter of finishing this first layer by working our way further down towards the medieval cellars along the canal. And so I want this part here to be a little bit brighter in color, and you also have this sort of greenish moss in there. So again, I'm just using whatever I have on my palette and drop in there what I need. So the lightest part of the painting is now pretty much done. So what I can do now before I start on the large shadow shapes is painting the details in the City Hall building. So the main two colors that I'm going to use for these shadows are lavender for the bluer parts, and raw umber to add some extra warmth. And if I want to make it even warmer, I can also add just a touch of cadmium orange. So the thing is with the shadows, especially on lighter surfaces, such as with this building, there is a lot of color in the shadows, and also bounce light, which is the warmer light that is reflected into the bluer shadows. So you get these gradients in the shadows from blue to a more warmer orange. So it's really important that you closely observe your subject, see where the shadows are cooler and where they are warmer. Be careful not to keep adding too much pigments into the wash or on top of it, because you might lose that beautiful glow. And as you can see, on top of that base layer, the base shadow, I have also dropped in a few darker pigments. So you get not only this gradient in color, but also this transition from dark to light. And here I am continuing down, and I'm starting to paint these columns. So first I paint the major shape, and then I come back in again with a clean and dry brush, and I soften the edges, because these columns they are sort of round, so there is this gradient in them. Painting the base of the columns, and the sunlight is just bouncing around in this building, creating these warm orangey shadows. So the base layer of the columns is still quite wet, so I'm dropping the darker paint into it and letting watercolor do what it does best, and let it just flow into each other. And now with a few bold strokes of the brush, I paint this larger shadow ridge. It will be covered by leaves of the tree later for the most part. Adding a bit more darkness to the base of the columns. And with this top layer still wet, adding a bit more detail to the shape of the shadow. And below these columns we have another kind of natural stone, which is more sort of bluish in hue, which also shows in the shadow. But we still want to keep that warm glow in there as well. So skipping ahead a bit, adding some extra darkness to the top, and painting around what will be a flagpole, one of 3 actually. And then we have this shadow line on the left of these columns. And then we have the cornice around the pediment, if that's correct. And the thing with painting these lines is you don't want it to be too regular. So that takes us to the next part of this painting. With the light side done, I'm now mixing the colors for the large shadow area, which will cover the building on the right. And the shadow color, again, is a mixture of things left on my palette. It's this sort of neutral, warm gray with a bit of cobalt blue in there, some burnt sienna to make it warmer, and maybe a touch of alizarin, and perhaps some random earth colors. And as I'm working under an angle with using a lot of water, the wash tends to drip down a bit, which can be annoying, but I'm not too concerned about that. I'm sort of painting around the area where the tree will be, trying to preserve some of the light in there. And then I can go in there with a mixture with some yellow, a bit of orange, where the tree will come. And then, very important, adding some darkness to the top of the wash. And another salvo of darker pigment, using less water this time. And as the wet paint is flowing down, I'm trying to add some architectural detail in the shadow. And then I realize that this whole shape is going to dry up a lot lighter. So if it looks right, it isn't right, but because it will be a lot lighter, so I have to add some extra dark in the wash. So I messed around here a bit longer than is really necessary. And the thing is with watercolor, the more you mess around with it, the worse it will get. So try to be efficient as possible. And here I'm continuing the wash down because we want this whole half of the painting, or third more like, we want it all to be one big shadow shape. We want it all to be connected. So it's important for the top part of this building to be darker, because that's where the shadow is from the roof line. And here I'm trying to add some sense of architectural detail in the shadow, but not too much, because it mustn't distract from the lighter part of the painting, which is the city hall. The problem is though that with all this paint I have kind of lost the pencil drawing underneath here, so I'm kind of lost here and not sure where to put these details exactly. So I'm making some mistakes with perspective. I should have drawn thicker lines here with a different kind of pencil, more like 3B instead of the HB that I used for the entire sketch. But luckily things are still light enough that I can go back over it later and fix things. What I do like though, and what is important, is that with this raw umber I added some extra warm glow into the wash to make it less boring. And you can also see it in the photo. So we got our major composition now. The light city hall building on the left, and the darker building on the right. And here in the middle we can now begin on the details of these houses there in the distance. So we're starting with the warmer and lighter part, where the sun reflects on the bricks and the roof of the buildings, and we can worry about the darker shadows later. And now also painting in the building on the left. And by doing so we also define the edge of the city hall building where it overlaps with the buildings in the distance. So we'll leave that for now, and we will go to these boats that are lying there along the canal. And I have created a mixture with a bit of lavender to make them the shadows of the boats a bit bluish, and dropping in some warmer colors as well. So now the houses in the distance have dried, so now we can go back in there and paint the shadows, the darker parts. So immediately we can see that this part of the painting is drawing most of the attention now, because the contrast here is very high. But that center of focus will shift a bit when we will add more of these details. So this old bridge here should be a lot darker. So we start on the left, where the light meets the shadow, and at first I'm trying to keep it soft as in the photo, but we will change that later. And this wash that I'm painting now, carefully painting around the canoe, it looks very dark as it is now, but it will actually dry up a lot lighter than you think. And especially if you just keep coming back in and adding water to it, then it will dry even lighter, so you gotta be careful with that. So I'm trying to keep the shadow shape interesting by not just painting in a single mixture, but allowing some variations between blue and more brown with burnt sienna. And now I'm painting around these boats here, and if they look a bit messy perhaps, that is okay, because with some gouache magic we can easily fix that. So now I am defining the tree a little bit more, making it blend in a bit more with the rest of the shadow area. Unfortunately I'm losing the highlights here a bit, but what is most important here is that the tree blends in with the rest of the shape and making it one big whole. Creating some extra stronger shadows on the right there, and also at the bottom of the tree. Again, you have to watch out here to not keep adding too much water, because it will dry very light. So the wooden board is a bit skewed here, but I hope you can kind of see what I'm doing on the bottom of the painting, because now I'm painting the water. And the color of the water is predominantly sort of green-brown. So I'm using some earth tones, a bit of quinacridone gold as well, to make it a bit greener. Defining some darker shadows here and there. And the tree has become a little flat now, because everything floats down, becoming one single mass, so I'm defining the shadows a bit more of the tree to give the whole a bit more interest. And because I lost some of the highlights there, I drop in a bit of gouache just to see what happens. So I wasn't really satisfied with that very soft edge of the shadow. It wasn't really working. So what I did is I went back in there and just created this hard shadow line. And also the shadow was a bit blue, so while I was working with the shadow anyway, I went back over there with a bit warmer glaze. But tinkering around with the shadow areas in this way is tricky business, so I don't recommend it too much. But if you think it will create a better painting in the end, then you have my blessing. And a bit of extra punch again on the right there. And so we can let this dry now. And with the left part already dried, we can add a bit more texture to the part of the cellars that is in the light, because it really must have that worn medieval look. So I'm using the texture of the paper to create these dry brush effects here. And as you can see, the area in the light especially requires some extra detail work. So I'm going a bit to and fro here to add some extra detail. I don't like working on one part of the painting for too long, so that's why I'm kind of going from here to there, especially with the smaller details. So now I'm adding some extra shadow to these boats, trying to recover their shapes, and very importantly, these nice strong shadows contrasting with the light of the bricks. There's all these cellar doors and windows and these iron things that keep it all together, and defining these darker rubber bands in these pedal boats, and these shadows where the boats meet the water. And then I extended shadow further down, suggesting the reflections of the shadow of the buildings into the waves of the canal. And I'm using a sort of Chinese calligraphy brush to draw these lines, to suggest these waves. And it's important to allow for variation in hue when painting these water surfaces. And now using a bluish mixture for the reflection of the sky in the windows, but not too much. So the bottom part is completely dried now, but it was bothering me a bit because the tunnel that goes underneath the bridge, that needs to be really dark. So now I'm going in wet over dry and making it really dark. And by working wet on dry, we can also define some of the texture effects, such as these bricks that go along the mouth of the tunnel. And then there's also this slight indentation, this sort of little arch here. So I'm painting it on wet and dry, and then softening the edges a bit. And now some of these really nice sharp shadow lines. Again, softening the edges underneath. And this shadow line where it meets the light can be a bit sharper still. This is looking a lot better. And then continuing down, adding the darkest part that is in the reflection of the water. Continuing here again with the calligraphy brush to the right. And now adding some extra shadow to the tree again. Would have been nice to get it exactly right the first time, but that's just the way it is sometimes. But the good thing is the shadow area has all dried up, so when working wet on dry, it's a lot easier to maintain these shadow shapes that you are painting. Adding a bit of extra shadow on the bottom left. Defining further the architectural details on the City Hall building. And if I'm painting on the building too much, I get a bit impatient, and now I'm shifting to the flowers, which gives a very nice colorful accent to the whole painting. So I've used some restraint in the color palette so far, using a lot of muted colors. So now these nice flowers will pop out all the more. And also the red canoe underneath the bridge. So even though those flowers are orange-red and the rest is this dark green, I'm not afraid to just paint those flowers first and then add the green while the flowers are still wet. It is nice if things flow a bit into each other, because that is the beauty of this medium. Now back to the building again. And here I am starting on this beautiful lantern. And of course there are flowers hanging from the lantern as well. And now the top of the lantern, and the trick is to not paint things too neatly. And drawing in some of the people, trying to find that sweet spot between realism and keeping things a bit impressionistic as well. And now these figures will mostly be just silhouettes with a bit of color in them. And here comes this sort of sign, but I made it a lot smaller than it is in real life because it was really obnoxious right there in the focus point. And now with some extra care and attention to detail, I'm painting this wonderful little statue of a girl riding on a horse, I think. And I love just how all these dark silhouettes stand out against the lighter background. And we can go darker still on these rooftops. Just lots of tiny details, such as this lamppost here in the shadow area. And at this stage I'm still kind of wondering what to do with the building in the shadow, because it is a bit rough still compared with the delicateness of the city hall. So I'm just trying to paint some detail, guessing where things should be. Making the roof line a bit darker still, painting wet on dry, and now it finally stays as dark as I want it, because I'm not working into a wet layer anymore. And then the painting is not complete without adding all of these cast iron fences. And I'm using a rigger brush to do most of the finer work, and you have to find out for yourself which kind of rigger brush you prefer for which job. You got to do just some experimenting with that. And then this signpost in the middle here. This part is also quite satisfying actually, painting all these bicycles that are standing along the fence. And still using that rigger brush and just drawing some ellipses for the wheels. And defining the shadow shape here a bit more strongly, really helping the composition. I like the subtlety of the shadows that I painted on the City Hall building, but I think it needs a bit more punch. In the photo you can see the shadows are quite a lot darker. So the tricky part is here to add this extra darkness without ruining that delicacy and that beautiful play of cool and warm colors. And now defining a bit all of the complex imagery in the relief. Just make it look believable and give the suggestion that there are figures in there. Adding in some of the shadows of the windows, again using a bit of lavender and raw umber. And also with a rigger brush, painting in the lines of these windows. Now you have to paint them along with the perspective. They can look very off otherwise, but you don't want to paint them in too neat lines. Anything that is painted too strongly would subtract from the rest of the painting. Adding some definition to the windows of the cellars. And also on the shadow side you have all of these windows and doors. And so I'm painting something, I'm wiping it out again, trying to find that right balance, keeping it a bit impressionistic. And the left side of the city hall needs to be a bit more defined. And now comes a quite fun part of the painting, one that gives the major leap ahead, and that is painting these leaves in the top right. So I'm using here a cheap fake scroll brush. It has the shape that matches the shapes of these leaves. And I'm painting them with a very strong dark mixture. So we really get maximum amount of contrast between foreground and background. And if you're afraid of ruining your painting by painting these leaves over it, then practice some of them first on a separate sheet of paper until you get them right. So I quite like how the shape of the leaves turned out, and now with a perla brush I'm adding in an even darker mix into the still wet leaves. And here I'm allowing for a bit of variation in hue and also in darkness. And now we want some nice vertical lines in there as well. And with the rigger brush I paint these flagpoles. And I don't want the colors from these flags to be too strong. I don't want them to distract from the rest of the painting. At this stage there are still all these little details to be done, such as these darker lines. And I'm fading them out a bit, dripping some water on top of it, wiping it off. Adding some of the window work here as well. And here below is the drop shadow of sort of mirror. That is handy of course for boats that come through the tunnel. And here the shadows need to be a bit darker still. Adding a line here. And now most of the painting is looking quite finished at this stage, but there's still this annoying building here on the right, which is still not quite right. So in order to correct the mistakes in perspective and all that, I wanted to get this absolutely right. So I'm using a tool here now called a scale divider. It's this wooden tool, and I simply measure points on the reference photo, and by turning the device around I can measure where I have to put those points on my painting. And now the back of my head is a bit more in view because of all this detail work. And I will spare you most of these details, but I just want you to get an idea of what I'm doing here. So I'm putting in more detail into the building on the right than I had in mind, but I think it's necessary to achieve the level of detail that of realisticness that I'm going for. So I can now put aside the scale divider and paint this nice little statue there on top of the building. And now moving my head to the left so you can see what I'm doing here. Adding a bit of randomness on top of the roof. So now with this building on the right, with all that detail added, I want to do a bit more work on this tree. So first I glaze it to give it some more color, so that's looking better already. Adding a bit more detail work on the windows. And with the tree fully dried, I want to define the shape of the tree some more, because the shape of the tree is not really defined against the building on the background. and I want to create some more definition inside the tree itself. It sort of consists of two parts. So this way I separate the top part from the bottom, and that's better. And adding a little bit more shadow above there behind the relief. So the painting is now looking more and more finished. And now comes the phase where we put in some extra highlights with the help of gouache. And I'm using the gouache straight from the tube, only adding tiny amounts of water when I have to cover larger surfaces. But then it tends to dry darker, contrary to watercolor. So you have to add some extra layers over that to get the brightness that you want. So these boats could use a little bit more work. So now with the gouache added, they look a lot better. And you can add these nice subtle highlights where some of the skylight reflects on the top of these boats. And I'm further defining these seats, these little chairs in the boats. Working our way to the right from boat to boat, and defining the shape of these people, making some bits darker with watercolor and making bits lighter again with gouache. And I want them to have this nice bluish glow on the top of their heads and their shoulders from where the skylight is falling down on them. And some darker details on the boat. They have these yellow lines and little red things as well. And now I'm going to try something that I think the painting will benefit a lot from. So I'm adding some highlights with gouache on top of that tree in the section in the middle there. And this way I add a little bit of light into that large dark shape, which helps to break it up a little bit. So there we have our principle of yin and yang again. We have some dark in the light area with the dark leaves hanging from above, and then we have all these highlights in the large shadow shape, and of course defining the people in the red canoe. And adding an extra door here on the right and making the shadow line a bit more visible. And the water, can use some highlights with gouache as well, with a rigger brush. Breaking through some of these shadow shapes. And some more highlights underneath these white pedal boats. I like how the gouache gives them a more plasticky look, because they are made of plastic in reality. And with some darker watercolor, adding some little iron fence work in the building there. And then with the rigger with gouache paint, I can also add some highlights in the building in the shadow, especially to suggest some of the details in the windows. And then in the city hall, there were also some highlights in the architecture that need to be retrieved using the same gouache. And painting around these highlights would have been a lot of trouble. So I reserved these for last. And in the middle section as well, you can see I'm adding these little light blocks inside this shadow area. And I tried to get the placement and the spacing right. And then it's just a matter of finishing the last details, such as in the buildings in the distance, adding some highlights. And here, at the edge of this tunnel, a nice little trick using gouache to paint these highlights in these large stones, which gives a very nice effect. And now the last part. The sky was perhaps a bit too subtle, so I'm doing something a bit tricky, and that is adding another layer on top of it. Doesn't always make it prettier, but I hope it will not ruin all the work we've done so far. So we're starting with warmer hues again, and as before I drop in a bluish mixture. Using a tissue to wipe off excess paint. And now with the sky dried, one last thing, painting the flag in the colors of Utrecht. Now it can easily get too strong, this red I'm painting. So I make sure I tone it down a little bit. But I like how the red of the flag is also seen reflected in the red of the canoe below it. And there we go, the flag is finished, and I think this painting is now complete. So let's look at the results we got here. So I am happy with how this painting turned out, especially the part that is in the light. I like the translucency and the delicacy of the details in the city hall, and I'm also quite fond of all these details in the middle. All these old lanterns, these fences, the bicycles that are standing against them, and a nice little statue with the girl on the horse. The shadow area could have gone a bit more smoothly, but especially with this building it was hard to get the perspective right, so I had to put in the extra efforts to achieve the amount of accuracy needed. So I hope the next video will come a little bit sooner than this one, but for all of you who have seen the previous video, thank you again for your patience. And I'm showing you here a little fragment of the previous video that I made, and wow, the number of views for this video was significantly more than the first few videos that I made, and I gained a lot more subscribers in the past few weeks. And seeing such response is such a great reward for all the effort I put in making these videos. So here again, the painting that we made today. I hope you liked this one as well. And if you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. If you click the bell button, you will be notified when a new video comes out. And you can also find me at other platforms such as Instagram by clicking the links in the description. You can let me know in the comments how you like this video. I wish you all the luck with your watercolor endeavors, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.